Greetings, and welcome to the Minnesota Zoo in beautiful Apple Valley, Minnesota. Today we will be visiting the Animatronic Mesozoic age, when the most mighty creatures ever to walk the earth stand in one place and repeat the same series of movements over and over again. Overlooking the entrance, we have the dinosaur Dilophosaurus, an early theropod or predatory dinosaur. The Dilophosaurus, as we will see, spits at the oncoming visitors to the dinosaur exhibit as they come in, because that's entertainment. The problem with this idea is that the Dilophosaurus was an early dinosaur about this size, and it was the largest predator of its age. So the idea that the largest predator anywhere to be found would have what in living animals is a defensive mechanism, an extreme defensive mechanism, is not terribly likely. It had more than enough of what it needed without speculative poison glands. But at least this way, many children become very wet for no reason. Sauropods, the largest animals ever to walk the earth. The longest sauropods were over 10,000 feet long. Brachiosaurus itself was easily 40 feet high, and more impressive than that, they have found series of footprints that conform to the kind of feet that a brachiosaur has. That, if the animal that left the footprints had the same dimensions as a brachiosaurus did, had the same relative neck length and body size, the animal that left the footprints would be 70 feet tall. God damn. This is Parasaurolophus, one of the hadrosaurs, the so-called duck-billed dinosaurs. Now, obviously the most impressive thing about the Parasaurolophus would be that crest. The nasal passages go all the way back to the end of the crest, double back, and then come forward into the head before they go down into the neck, creating a sort of trombone situation. It is believed then that one of the purposes of the crest was to enable the making of unbelievably loud sounds. These sounds would be made to communicate with other members of the herd, presumably cries of alarm, maybe jokes. There's no way for us to know at this time. It was once believed that the purpose of the crest was to hold additional air while these animals swam in the water. It was believed that these animals swam in the water to a large degree because they have kind of duck-like bills, and ducks swim in the water. I will not point out to our thoughtful viewing audience the ways in which this animal also does not resemble a duck. Now here we have Pachycephalosaurus. Notable thing about Pachycephalosaurus is, of course, that huge domed head. Most of that is not brain, but rather bone. Now the purpose of this is in question. It used to be thought that they were for mating rituals, like the horns of bighorn sheep, that they would bang their heads together. And this may be the case, but there's a problem with that in that the rounded nature of the head would mean that if two of these animals banged their heads together straight on, they would glance off of each other in a way that would be very conducive to breaking their necks right in half. It is now thought it is more likely that this was just a general weapon against predators, an ankylosaurus tail on the head. Another idea is that the bones we have, the skeletons we have, that dome describes the base of a huge giant horn. This is not a very popular idea, however, for reasons that include that would look ridiculous. This is Quetzalcoatlus, and this is where the accuracy of these exhibits so far begins to take a bit of a turn. For one thing, the pterosaurs have been known since the 1970s to be a group of animals that were covered in fur. You've heard about dinosaur feathers, and we'll get to that in a moment, but that's a relatively recent phenomenon. The pterosaurs have been covered in fur for 40 years, and this is clearly a leathery animal. Secondly, we again, and perhaps more significantly this time, have an animal that is depicted as much, much smaller than it actually was in life. An actual Quetzalcoatlus would have been more than twice the height that we're seeing here, and that's on all fours. Quetzalcoatluses would walk around on the earth with their huge, enormous wings and great long legs and huge, long necks, and they would have roughly the proportions between body and legs and neck of a giraffe. And then they would jump in the air, spread their wings, and fly. I don't have any jokes about Quetzalcoatlus. I take Quetzalcoatlus very seriously. Tyrannosaurus Rex, a name that means king tyrant lizard, which indicates information about dinosaur governmental systems that the paleontology does not in fact bear out. Now, Tyrannosaurus Rex has recently been reclassified as a kind of dinosaur called a coelurosaur. The theropods, the meat eaters, used to be put into two groups, the carnosaurs and the coelurosaurs. All of the big ones were called carnosaurs, and all of the small ones were called coelurosaurs. However, this is a very, very bad way to actually organize the relationships of animals. By this logic, a cat would be related not to a lion, but a salmon. And this, of course, is not the case. However, the reclassification based on qualities of the skeleton of the Tyrannosaurus Rex as a coelurosaur does have one remarkable implication, which is that the coelurosaurs were the dinosaurs that are known to be feathered. Now, many people are obviously very upset about the possibility that Tyrannosaurus Rex would be a feathered animal because it's a dinosaur from their childhood that they remember as this draconic creature. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine because the feathers on the dinosaurs were for insulation, like the fur on a mammal. And what happens with mammals is that when a mammal gets very, very large, it loses its fur. An elephant does not have fur, a rhino, a hippo does not have fur. And so an animal of this size, of this majestic, awesome size, probably wasn't feathered. It's okay. This is Chasmosaurus, a smaller relative of the Triceratops. Now, I'm sorry to bring up Triceratops. I know many of you are still very sad about Triceratops, but I want to tell you not to be. Triceratops still exists. The animals called Triceratops are still called Triceratops. The only thing that's happened is another animal called Torosaurus has been called more Triceratopses, Triceratopses that are older and as such have longer, more rectangular frills. That's all that's happened to Triceratops. It's still the same thing, it's just the old ones have longer, more rectangular frills. Not unlike this one, in fact. Pluto is also still real, but that's another story entirely. This is Deinonychus, known on the panel here at the Animatronic Show as Deinonychus Slasher for reasons that I do not understand. Now, Deinonychus was the animal that was misnamed in Jurassic Park as Velociraptor in one of those name change complication things such as happened with Brontosaurus to Apatosaurus and such as did not happen to Triceratops. I want you to drop that. Now, the reason that Velociraptor, actually Deinonychus, was sort of the poster creature for that whole series is that Deinonychus was awesome. It was an incredible killing machine, about the size of a man, covered in teeth and claws, in particular the killing claw, the second from inner claw on each of its feet that was much larger than the other claws and held up off of the ground when it walked so that it could kick out with it and slash it downwards, gutting its prey. This was also an animal that was most certainly feathered. Not feathered with a couple dozen really stupid looking rubber feathers along its spine, but rather covered in feathers like a bird. Disappointing to some, but an animal such as has never existed in the world. Underneath our Deinonychus, we see its prey. Its prey is not named here at the park, but it is almost certainly Tenontosaurus. The major find of Deinonychuses in 1969 was a whole pack of them with what appeared to be their prey, a plant-eating, rather boring plant-eating dinosaur called Tenontosaurus. If you do a Google search for Tenontosaurus, a Google image search for Tenontosaurus, you will get almost nothing but pictures of Tenontosauruses being slaughtered by Deinonychus. An ignominious claim to fame, but better than nothing. What you have just seen is exactly like the process of actual fossil reconstruction.